Hi, and welcome to the show, where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Craig Bowron. He is a hospitalist, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, "Bloated Notes Are a Huge Problem and a Time Suck." Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here. It's an honor to be part of your media empire. You've really built something.
Well, thank you so much for writing, reading, and listening. And we'll get into your article in a little bit. But first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I was growing up, I grew up in a smaller town in northern Illinois, and I really had the vision of becoming a small town doctor. I now work I basically spent my career as a hospitalist in a tertiary care center in downtown Minneapolis. So sometimes life is just living rather than the other way around. I started, I refer to myself as a silverback hospitalist because I started as a hospitalist in 1995, 96. And at the time there was just three people in our group. And we certainly didn't use the term hospitalist or knew what that was. And now there's 80. So it's, again, from having these aspirations of being a small town doctor to end up being a hospitalist in a tertiary care center has been quite a journey. I was also an English major in undergrad. And so shortly after I was writing all along, but shortly after I finished my residency, I started writing. So I've kind of had a dual career, mostly not writing to physicians. I think your site is kind of unusual for me, but mostly writing to the public. And that's been, I really enjoy that part of it. Because, as physicians, what do we end up doing? We spend a lot of our time explaining to people why they're sick, what's going on, what we want to try to do to figure it out, what we're going to do about it. Those two things, a hospitalist and a writer.
So you've been a hospitalist for 15 plus years now. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges facing the hospitalist profession, and where do you envision the hospitalist profession to go in the near future?
Well, they predicted the future quite accurately. People they're going to come in the hospital and spend a shorter time in the hospital. They're going to be more sick, and it'd be medically more complicated. And that it has followed that script. It's just so interesting to see. Like everyone, you kind of think, can people get any more complicated? Can the pace move anybody any faster? Asking this question the minute they roll in, we're already planning like, how can we facilitate their discharge? Obviously we're not trying to rush anybody out, but and just really the sheer complexity of people that who we're keeping alive is just stunning to me. I trained, just as the HIV pandemic, the AIDS pandemic was really rolling in 91, 92, when we saw that miraculously change in a couple of years with the protease inhibitors. But now, some of the things that we're doing in advanced cardiology, the people who we're placing valves on, it's really quite amazing. And I think those challenges will only intensify over the future, which is part of why I kind of got involved in our group and working on notes.
All right, so let's talk about that article where you share that experience, and it's titled "Bloated Notes Are a Huge Problem and a Time Suck." And that certainly applies to the primary care world that I'm in. But for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
Yeah, what's interesting about it is it's not a medical article. It comes out of a study done at the University of Virginia, and I think it's out of their engineering and psychology departments. So it doesn't have a medical background. But so they did the experimenters, they did 8 separate experiments. And they asked people to do some simple solving of a problem. And the problem, as they put them together, had a subtractive solution, or it had a more complicated additive solution. Like for instance, they developed this Lego device and said, "Can you fix this so we can carry a brick on top of it?" And the subtractive answer was to remove 1 Lego brick. The additive answer was to add 3 additional ones. And what they found was that through all of these separate 8 experiments, our natural proclivity is to add things.
Hmm.
and not subtract. And when I had this notes committee for our group, and when I read that, I'm like, I got it. This is, absolutely talking to us. As you know, as a primary caregiver, well, for instance, I have 80 people in my group. Most of those people I hardly ever interact with. Maybe at one of our social gatherings, or maybe at a group meeting. But the way I hardly ever interact with them directly. But the way I interact with them regularly is through our notes. Again, referencing our earlier conversation, the more complicated people get and the shorter they stay, the more we need to get this right. We need to have a summary that's concise and specific and detailed and not cluttered. We really need subtractive solutions, not additive, because we've all seen, like, if you do primary care, you probably get a hospital discharge summary, and you see that it is essentially a diary, a diary of every day. Well, this is what happened today, and this is what happened today, and this is what happened today. And you've got 20 minutes to do a post-op follow-up on this, on a summary that's like this long. This is not smart, and it takes a lot of extra time. So that was the gist of my take on this thing. It was that, listen, we're fighting our natural tendency to want to add stuff, and when really we got to work on subtracting stuff and giving people clarity.
Now, for those who aren't involved in the medical world, especially in the hospital, paint us a picture of a typical note that gets bloated over time, and how does that affect patient care?
The way we do our notes is it starts with a summary, and we kind of feel like, as the primary care doctor in the hospital, like, if there's someone who knows really everything that's happened, it ought to be us. Then we have the middle of the note, which kind of talks about the exam and what they're doing today. And then at the end is the assessment and plan. And that summary that we have, daily summary, is the way that we communicate doctor to doctor. So there's no way that I can talk with the person who's coming on overnight and on every one of my patients. But they ought to be able to see that note quickly, if they get called, quickly read it, know where that patient's at, and be able to make decisions. So that's kind of how we do our notes. I don't know how you feel about this, but to me, gathering the information on a patient is like 80 to 90% of the work. Mm-hmm. The last 10% is like, once you have everything in front of you, you can say, like, okay, I got all the pieces of the puzzle. I know what, the actual decision on, we need a CT scan, or we need to have you need a bone marrow biopsy, or whatever. That's the last 10%. But when the details, the important details, are scattered, it's an intense amount of work to actually kind of know, like, where are we at, and get to that decision point where you can actually start making orders or making changes. So it's really critical that I think sometimes, there's a push in medicine that we ought to be able to be better storytellers. And sometimes that can be poo-pooed as, oh, you want us all to be the next John Updike. But it's really about communicating clearly what's going on with our patients, where we're at right now, getting rid of the junk, so that, whether it's me or someone who's picking up this patient, for us, the busiest days are Mondays and Saturdays, because that's where we're coming on and we're seeing patients that are new to us and we don't know. Mm-hmm. And when you have an excellent summary, like, you read it, bing, 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 you are ready to work for that patient. And if it's not there, it's just a lot more extra time. It kind of reminds me of, if you ever gone to one of these grocery stores where it's like the size of an aviation hangar. Mm-hmm. The good news is everything you want is in there. The bad news is you got to find it, and you may not find it. And that's the way. And it's typical that when we talk about what I mean to the lay people about a bloated note, is that people are just adding stuff. Mm-hmm. They're not getting rid of old stuff that's no longer of any importance. They're just adding stuff, so it gets longer and longer and longer. And again, everything you need to know is in there. Mm-hmm. It's just not easy to find.
Now, who's ultimately responsible for the solution? Is it the maker of the EHRs? Is it hospital administration? Is it physicians themselves? Who's ultimately responsible for solving this problem?
Well, as I was just talking with a partner and a friend of mine who was in oncology, and he was happened to be looking back at these older notes from his partners, a generation ago, and how short and concise they were and what they are now. So some of note bloat is for billing purposes. I think let's be honest about that. It has to hit a certain number of points in order to justify billing. And I sort of, maybe it's a nihilistic sort of view, but I sort of think that's out of my purview. That's not something I'm going to change. So the things that are in my purview, like the summary, and which really the EHR can never just automatically generate a summary. That's my issue. And those are the things that we can fix. So within my group, I love my group. I think we work at a really high level. So I don't want to pretend that somehow we're doing bad notes, but we can do better. And so we've started this initiative to try to improve that. The problem is, this stuff isn't like dot phrases, that can be fixed. We've done some stuff with automation, the way the EHR has helped us, but most of this is just kind of, it's just really, can you tell this story concisely and to the point? When I saw that research article, it was very curious to me. I would love to see if they got a group of writers and editors to take those 8 same tests and to see if they would come up with the same results, because writing and editing really is one profession where from the beginning, that you are overwriting, and then you will edit back. Whatever famous book you can think of, it was a lot larger when they started, and then they edited back to make it the best that it can be. And I think it's challenging for people. They're like, should I get rid of that? They showed in that research, they showed that when people got stressed, or they made the people they were experimenting with, they made them busier. They were even more likely to just add something, add something, just add something because I'm busy, rather than to subtract. So, part of it is giving ourselves more time to do that. And the other thing I think within my group is that I hope that once we start to see these shorter, more concise summaries come around, that it will become a movement. And when you inherit my patient on Monday and you say, like, boy, Craig's note, that's really tight, you get an idea of, like, my summaries can be tighter. And that maybe, through that way alone, we'll be able to kind of ratchet things down.
We're talking to Craig Bowron. He is a hospitalist, and he wrote the Kevin MD article, "Bloated Notes Are a Huge Problem and a Time Suck." Craig, what are some actionable tips you could share with fellow hospitalists listening to this podcast on how they can pare down their notes and make their notes more sharper and concise?
So one of the things is we kind of use an opening sentence. And as oftentimes those have been like almost sedimentary rock. They've just been, they're from 12 notes ago, and they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And yes, they'll have something like heart failure, but no description. So was it heart, like they have severe heart failure and they're being seen by advanced heart failure team? Or does heart failure mean that one time they went in the clinic, there was a chest x-ray that suggested a little bit of pulmonary edema, and now they have heart failure? So asking our members, like, when you write, here's 10 or 15 critical diagnoses, heart failure, put behind it ejection fraction of 35%, or heart failure, with reduced EF. And if you say a COPD, tell me, is it moderate or severe? Are they on HOMO 2? Just in a very short parentheses, so that in that opening sentence, we hear the most critical information about the most critical diagnoses. And then the other side of that is, I don't really care that they've had, status post bunions, that they have occasional gout, that they have, GERD, unless they're coming in with epigastric pain. So keep that opening sentence to the really critical things. So trim that down. One of the things about excess language is, if you look, oftentimes it says, this is a 33-year-old gentleman with a past medical history pertinent for. I know it's past medical history. I can infer that. I know that it's pertinent because I assume it's pertinent because you're telling me that it's pertinent. So just say, this is a 72-year-old with heart failure. Don't tell me with a past medical history that's pertinent for. And then very commonly, what you see next is basically a reprise of the HPI, and that they were sick for 3 weeks and they did this and that. And then they came in the emergency room, and the emergency room did this and this. And, and that is just left there. That was from post-op day 1. Get rid of that. If you came in and said that, they felt poorly for 2 weeks and were found to have urosepsis and with a obstructive kidney stone in the emergency room, just say that. Get rid of all that extra stuff. We often pick up patients from the ICU, and of course, ICU stays are very complicated, and you can go deep in the weeds. But it's enough to say, like, they were on multiple pressors and were weaned off pressors on this date. It's enough to tell me that they were intubated and then reintubated and permanently extubated on this date. So just getting rid of, for instance, neurology was consulted and recommended CT scan. CT showed, just say, CT showed. There's just the challenge is if you think it's as short as it can get, try again. Because once I was the kind of head of this notes committee, I felt like an extra burden, like to make sure my notes were good. And I've spent the whole last year, they're getting shorter, and they're not, to my view, and I think to my partners, they've not suffered for it. They're better. So if you think it's short, it can get shorter. And I say that both as a hospitalist, but also as a writer, it can get shorter, and it'll almost certainly be better.
So the concept of concise notes in internal medicine is almost the antithesis of what medical students are taught in medical school, right? Because traditionally in internal medicine rotations, it's always the students that has the most comprehensive notes. They write pages and pages that get the honors. Now, how do you reconcile that with your thoughts on notes needing to be more concise?
So it's almost like, if you think of medical school as, let's say the medical school is learning medicalese. You are here to learn a language, and so that language, you write much more than you need because you don't know what's important. You have to include everything. You cast a wide net. So I work with medical students, and of course, on a busy day, and they're presenting. You're kind of like, hurry up, get to the important stuff. I don't care that that their temperature was 97.3 or was it 97.4? Let me look at it. It was 97. You don't care. The difference is, what's important, and that's called wisdom. So I totally understand, and I think it's necessary. You need to know. I tell first-year med students, I don't suggest memorizing a lot, but you need to memorize a review of systems so that when someone comes into your office and says, "I think I might be depressed," you have some words to use, and some symptoms to check. The way med students do it now, it's necessary. They're learning this language. It has to explode. But then when you get experience and wisdom, now it's time to implode, and get shorter and more concise. So I don't see that the two ways are necessarily, at odds. Although, I think part of my role is educating med students to say, like, today, why don't you give me the briefest, you don't have to give me the full, and just tell me what you think is important. So I do challenge them to, you don't have to give me the whole spiel. Give me the Saturday. We're all short on time. I need to know what I need to know. And so, I don't think they're particularly at odds.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
So there's a companion article to the Nature magazine one in Scientific American, and it has like a 6-minute video. It's very good. It's really, really well done. And the Scientific American had comments on that. But in that video, one of the engineers from University of Virginia, he quotes this philosopher Lao Tzu, who said that to gain knowledge, you need to add information every day, and to gain wisdom, you have to subtract. Mm-hmm. And he was paraphrasing, and now I'm paraphrasing him. But I think that's really smart. And maybe they get back to medical students. They're adding. They want to develop knowledge. They want to get smarter. And so they're adding stuff every day. But as we get more experienced as physicians, really we want to be wise, and that allows us to get to the what's really wrong and what we need to do about it.
Craig, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate it.